The rain drummed against the windows of the Blackwood mansion as Alina Marchetti carefully folded her last sweater into the worn leather suitcase. 6 years of marriage reduced to a single baguette seemed almost poetic in its cruelty. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now loomed around her like a mausoleum, each room echoing with the ghost of dreams that would never materialize. "You're really leaving?" Victor's voice cut through the silence from the doorway. He stood there in his expensive suit, the same one he'd worn to countless charity galas where they'd smiled for photographers, playing the perfect couple. Now those smiles seemed like elaborate lies. Alina didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to see his face nod after what he'd said 3 days ago. The words still burned in her memory. "What's the point of a wife who can't even give me children?" "This marriage is a failure, Alina. We're a failure. The lawyers will handle the rest," she said quietly, zipping the suitcase closed. "I've signed everything you wanted, Alina. Please, we can work this out. We can try adoption, or no." She finally faced him, and Victor stepped back at the steel in her eyes. "Made your choice, Victor. You blamed me for something neither of us could control. You made me feel broken, worthless. I won't stay in a home where I'm seen as defective." Victor's jaw tightened. "I never said you were defective. You didn't have to." Alina picked up her suitcase. "Your mother made sure I understood exactly how the Blackwood family views women who can't produce heirs. And you stood there and let her?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with 6 years of accumulated resentment and shattered promises. Alina walked past him toward the door, her heels clicking on the marble floor that had once felt like home. "Where will you go?" Victor asked, his voice smaller now. Alina paused at the threshold. "Somewhere I can remember who I was before I became your disappointment." "You're nothing without me," Victor called after her, desperation creeping into his voice. "You have no money, no connections, no chains," Alina finished, stepping into the rain without looking back. As the taxi pulled away from the mansion, Alina watched her former life shrink in the rear window. She had $37. In her wallet, a one-way ticket to London, and for the first time in years, something she'd almost forgotten she possessed: hope. The plane ticket had been a gift from her late grandmother's estate lawyer, a mysterious inheritance she'd never understood. Now, as the city lights faded behind her, Lena wondered if her grandmother had somehow known this day would come. Little did she know that her real journey was just beginning. The transformation, the cramped London flat above the bakery smelled perpetually of cinnamon and fresh bread, a comforting contrast to the sterile opulence Alina had left behind. For 3 months, she'd survived on part-time work at a local cafe, her economics degree from Columbia gathering dust while she served lattes to tourists. But everything changed the day Marcus Wellington walked through her door. He was an unassuming man in his 50s, with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to see straight through people's facades. Unlike the power-hungry executives Alina had grown accustomed to in Victor's circle, Marcus possessed a quiet confidence that didn't need expensive suits or flashy watches to announce itself. "You're Alina Marchetti," he said, settling into the worn armchair across from her kitchen table. It wasn't a question. "How did you?" Alina began, instinctively pulling her threadbare cardigan tighter around herself. "Your grandmother, Beatrice Rossi, was my business partner for nearly 4 decades. Marcus explained, producing a manila folder from his briefcase. "She spoke of you often, especially in her final years. She was ... concerned about your marriage." Alina's breath caught. Her grandmother had died when she was 25, just 2 years into her marriage to Victor. They'd been close once, but Victor had gradually discouraged those relationships, claiming her family's middle-class background was embarrassing for someone of his status. "Nona left me some jewelry and a few $1,000s, Alina said carefully. "The lawyers handled everything." Marcus smiled sadly. "The lawyers handled what they knew about. Beatrice was remarkably private about her business dealings. Did you know she owned 17 properties across Europe? Or that her import company generated nearly $50 million in annual revenue?" The numbers hit Alina like a physical blow. "That's impossible. She lived in a tiny apartment in Queens. She worked in a textile factory." Until she was 30, Marcus corrected gently. Then she started importing fabrics directly from Italy. Your grandmother was brilliant, Alina. She understood markets, currencies, international trade law, but she also understood that women with money become targets. So she lived modestly and invested wisely. Alina stared at the folder, afraid to touch it. Why are you telling me this now? Because 18 months ago, Beatrice's business partner in Milan died without heirs. According to their partnership agreement, his half of their holdings reverts to Beatrice's bloodline? That would be you. Marcus leaned forward. Alina, you've inherited a fortune. But more importantly, you've inherited the skills to manage it. If you're willing to learn. Over the following weeks, Marcus became Elena's mentor, teaching her the intricacies of international finance that her grandmother had mastered. Alina discovered she had an intuitive understanding of market patterns, a gift for languages that made negotiating with European suppliers feel natural, and a strategic mind that had been dormant during her years as Victor's dutiful wife. Your grandmother left detailed notes, Marcus explained one evening as they reviewed shipping contracts in his Mayfair office. She believed you had the intelligence to continue her work, but she worried that your husband would never allow it. Alina looked up from the spreadsheets, realization dawning. She knew. Somehow she knew what would happen to my marriage. Marcus nodded gravely. Beatrice was a remarkable judge of character. She also left specific instructions about a child in Milan, the grandson of her former partner. The boy has been living in an orphanage since his parents died, according to your grandmother's will. Caring for him is part of your inheritance. As Alina absorbed this information, she felt something shift inside her, a sense of purpose she'd never experienced. Her grandmother hadn't just left her money, she'd left her a mission, a chance to honor a legacy while building something entirely her own. The woman who had fled New York in shame was gone. In her place stood someone Victor would never recognize. The discovery, the Casa dei Bambini orphanage, sat on a quiet street in Milan, its weathered brick facade softened by climbing roses that bloomed despite the October chill. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she approached the heavy wooden doors. Marcus beside her for moral support. 3 years had passed since she'd left New York, and she'd built a successful consulting firm specializing in international trade. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. Sister Catherine, a warm woman with laugh lines around her eyes, led them down a corridor lined with children's artwork. Thomas is a remarkable boy, she said in accented English. He's very bright, but quite serious for an 8-year-old. He's been asking about his grandfather's business partner for months since we told him someone was coming. They found Thomas in the library, hunched over a thick book about ships. He looked up as they entered, and Elena's breath caught. The boy had striking hazel eyes flecked with gold, and an intensity that seemed far beyond his years. Was neatly combed, and despite his simple clothes, he carried himself with an odd dignity. "Are you Alina?" he asked in careful English, closing his book and standing politely. "I am," Alina replied, kneeling to his eye level. "Want your Thomas?" "Hartley. Thomas Giovanni Hartley," he corrected gravely. Grandfather always said the full name was important for business. Marcus stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your grandfather was right. Names carry weight in business." He and Elena's grandmother were partners for many years. Thomas studied Alina with an unnerving directness. "Sister Catherine says, you're going to take care of me now. Does that mean I can learn about the ships?" Alina looked puzzled, but Marcus smiled knowingly. "Show her the papers, Thomas." The boy hurried to a small desk and returned with a folder surprisingly thick for a child's possession. Inside, Alina found shipping manifests, port schedules, and detailed notes written in a child's careful handwriting. "Grandfather taught me about the shipping routes before he died," Thomas explained earnestly. "He said the cargo ships carry more than just goods, they carry opportunities. The Hartley-Rossi line has 17 vessels operating between Mediterranean ports and North America." Alina stared at the papers, her mind reeling. She'd spent 3 years learning about her grandmother's textile import business. But this was something else entirely, a shipping empire she'd never known existed. The lawyers never mentioned shipping, she whispered to Marcus. Because the ships are registered under Thomas's name, Marcus explained quietly. His grandfather was protecting the assets from potential seizure. When Beatrice died, her half of the shipping business went into trust waiting for her heir to claim it by taking responsibility for Thomas. Thomas looked up at Alina with those serious eyes. Grandfather said his partner's granddaughter would come someday. He said she would be smart like her grandmother, and that together we could make the business even bigger. Alina felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was discovering. Her grandmother hadn't just left her a fortune, she'd left her a legacy intertwined with this remarkable child's future. "Thomas," she said softly, "would you like to come with me? We could learn about the business together." The boy's serious expression cracked for the first time, revealing a shy smile. "Could I really?" Sister Catherine says. "You live in London now?" "I've never seen London." As they walked through the orphanage gardens later that afternoon, Thomas chattering excitedly about port regulations and cargo manifests, Alina realized her grandmother's final gift was more profound than she'd imagined. She hadn't just inherited wealth, she'd been given the chance to be the mother she'd never thought she could be, while honoring a legacy that spanned generations. That night, she signed the adoption papers. Alina felt the last pieces of her old life fall away completely, the return the sleek Gulfstream G650 descended through the spring clouds toward Westchester County Airport, its white fuselage gleaming in the afternoon sun. Victor Blackwood stood at the window of his corner office, watching the private jet taxi toward the terminal with growing unease. He'd been tracking every wealthy investor who might be interested in salvaging his crumbling empire, and this unscheduled arrival had his full attention. His company, Blackwood Industries, was hemorrhaging money. 3 failed acquisitions, a scandal involving falsified safety reports, and the loss of their biggest client had pushed him to the brink of bankruptcy. The mansion was already in foreclosure, and his mother's medical bills from her recent stroke had drained what remained of his personal accounts. "Sir," his secretary Janet peered nervously around the door. "There's a woman here to see you. She says it's about a business proposition, but she won't give her name." Victor straightened his tie, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "Show her up immediately." His footsteps echoed in the hallway. Victor rehearsed his pitch one more time. He'd swallow his pride, offer controlling interest, whatever it took to save the company his grandfather had built. The door opened, and time seemed to stop. Lena walked into his office with a poise that took his breath away. Gone was the uncertain woman who'd left with a single suitcase. Her tailored navy suit was clearly custom-made, her hair styled in an elegant chignon. Diamond earrings caught the light as she moved, but it was her eyes that truly shocked him. They held a confidence and intelligence that he'd somehow never noticed before. Behind her walked a boy of perhaps 11 now, impeccably dressed in a small suit. His hazel eyes surveyed the office with the calculating gaze of someone far older than his years. "Hello, Victor," Elena said, her voice steady and measured. "You look... tired." Victor's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. He'd imagined this moment countless times over the past 4 years, what he'd say if Alina ever returned, how he'd explain, perhaps even apologize. But faced with this transformed woman, all his rehearsed words evaporated. "Alina," he finally managed. What are you doing here?" "Business," she replied simply, settling into the chair across from his desk. Thomas stood beside her, his small hands clasped behind his back, in a surprisingly adult gesture. "I hear Blackwood Industries is in trouble." Word traveled fast in their circles, but Victor was surprised by how casually she mentioned his failures. "Things have been challenging," he admitted, studying her face for any sign of the woman he'd once known. "But we're exploring several options." "No, you're not," Elena interrupted gently. "Your creditors are circling. Your stock price has dropped 92%. And your largest remaining asset, the shipping contracts with Mediterranean suppliers, expires next month." The accuracy of her information chilled him. "How could you possibly know that?" Lena smiled, and for the first time he caught a glimpse of something almost predatory in her expression. "Because those suppliers work exclusively with the Hartley-Rossi shipping line. And as of 18 months ago, I controlled that line." Victor felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible." "Thomas," Alina said softly, "would you show Mr. Blackwood the manifests?" The boy stepped forward and placed a leather portfolio on Victor's desk with ceremonial precision. Inside were shipping documents, port authorities, and cargo schedules, all bearing the Hartley-Rossi stamp that Victor recognized from years of business correspondence. My grandmother and Thomas's grandfather built something remarkable together, Alina explained as Victor stared at the papers in disbelief. A shipping empire that controls 60% of textile and luxury goods transport between Europe and North America. Your business has been entirely dependent on our services for over a decade. Victor looked up at her, finally understanding the magnitude of what he was seeing. You came back to destroy me. Elena's expression softened slightly. No, Victor. I came back to offer you a choice. The boy Tomas spoke for the first time, his young voice clear and surprisingly authoritative. Alina says you used to be married. She says you might have been a good man once, before you forgot what really matters. As Victor stared at this unlikely pair, his former wife and a child who spoke like a boardroom executive, he realized that everything he thought he knew about Elena, about power, about what made someone valuable, had been catastrophically wrong. The reckoning Judge Margaret Sinclair had presided over countless corporate disputes in her 30-year career. But the case unfolding in her Manhattan courtroom was unlike anything she'd encountered. Mahogany-paneled chamber hummed with tension as lawyers shuffled papers and whispered urgently to their clients. Alina sat at the plaintiff's table, her composure unshakable despite the magnitude of the proceedings. Thomas, now officially her adopted son, sat beside her in a miniature suit, occasionally passing her documents with the efficiency of a seasoned paralegal. Across the aisle, Victor hunched over his legal pad, his once pristine appearance now showing signs of strain-wrinkled shirt, stubble, and the hollow-eyed look of a man who hadn't slept in weeks. Your Honor, Elena's attorney began, my client is not seeking punitive damages. She's here to reclaim what was rightfully hers under a partnership agreement that predates Mr. Blackwood's marriage to Mrs. Marchetti by 15 years. Judge Sinclair reviewed the documents through her reading glasses. The case was straightforward. Legally, Elena's grandmother had indeed owned substantial shares in several companies that Victor's business had absorbed through marriage. But the human drama beneath the legal framework was what held her attention. Mrs. Marchetti, the judge said, you're claiming ownership of assets worth approximately $200 million? Assets that were effectively transferred to Mr. Blackwood during your marriage without your knowledge of their true value.
That's
correct, Your Honor, Alina replied. I was deliberately kept ignorant of my own inheritance. Lawyers were instructed to minimize the apparent value to protect me from fortune hunters. But the full documentation was to be revealed when I reached 35, or in the event of divorce. Victor's lawyer stood shakily. Your Honor, my client maintains that these assets were legitimately incorporated into Blackwood Industries as part of the marital estate. Mr. Patterson, Judge Sinclair interrupted, your client signed documents acknowledging these assets belong to a trust fund. He cannot claim ignorance of their separate nature. Thomas leaned forward slightly, catching the judge's attention. The boy's presence had been unusual from the start. Most children weren't permitted in such proceedings, but his legal status as the other trust beneficiary made his attendance necessary. Son, Judge Sinclair addressed him gently. Do you understand what's happening here? Thomas stood politely. Yes, Your Honor. Alina is reclaiming what her grandmother left her, but she told me she wants to give Mr. Blackwood a choice instead of just taking everything. Alina rose gracefully. Your Honor, I'd like to make a formal offer to Mr. Blackwood. Victor looked up sharply, hope flickering in his exhausted eyes. Mr. Blackwood, Alina said, turning to face her former husband directly. I'm prepared to return control of 40% of these assets to you, along with a 10-year management contract for the shipping operations. In exchange, you'll work as a salaried executive in the company your grandfather founded under my direction. The courtroom fell silent. It was an extraordinarily generous offer, essentially handing Victor back a fortune while requiring only that he swallowed his pride. There's one condition, Alina continued. You'll spend 2 years establishing a charitable foundation focused on supporting women leaving abusive marriages. You'll work directly with shelters, provide job training, offer microloans for women, starting businesses. You'll learn what it means to rebuild from nothing. Victor stared at her, his face cycling through disbelief. anger, and finally, something that might have been understanding. You want me to become you? I want you to become someone who understands that a person's worth isn't measured by what they can produce or provide, Lena said quietly. Someone who knows that strength sometimes looks like starting over. Judge Sinclair watched this exchange with growing fascination. Mr. Blackwood, you have a choice. Accept Mrs. Marchetti's offer, or face liquidation of all contested assets. With no compensation. Victor looked around the courtroom at the lawyers, at Elena's serene confidence, at Thomas's serious young face. Finally, his gaze settled on his former wife. Why? He asked hoarsely. After everything I put you through, why would you give me anything? Elena's expression softened for the first time that day. Because the woman who left you 4 years ago believed people could change. I still believe that, Victor. But this time, you'll have to prove it to yourself. As Judge Sinclair prepared to formalize the agreement, Thomas tugged gently on Elena's sleeve. Do you think he'll take it? He whispered. Elena looked at the broken man across the aisle, then at the remarkable boy beside her son in every way that mattered. I think, she said softly, everyone deserves a second chance to become who they're meant to be. The gavel fell, echoing through the chamber like the closing of one story and the beginning of another.